welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going deep on something I think we can all relate to, loneliness. And, I was really struck by this writing you sent over. It uses some pretty powerful metaphors to get at what loneliness really is.
Yeah, it really flips the script on how we usually think about loneliness. The author digs into this idea that, it's not just about being physically alone, but about the walls we put up, like internally.
Oh, absolutely. It's funny you should say that because this piece actually compares our inner selves to a house, but it's a house with a ton of locked doors.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and each door is like hiding some fear or vulnerability. What do you think about that? I mean, that image of all those locked doors, it's pretty powerful.
It is. It's a brilliant way to think about it, right? It's like we lock these parts of ourselves away, like we think we're, keeping them safe, but really we're just cutting ourselves off. And not just from other people, but from ourselves too.
Yeah, no, totally. And I'm already starting to think about like what doors I might have in my own house, so to speak. But the thing is, the source doesn't just leave us staring at these locked doors.
Right.
It talks about how to unlock them.
Right.
And it even calls it a grand heist, which I love.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
It's such a perfect analogy because it takes work to unlock these doors, It's about facing those fears, understanding why we lock things away. And, we have to be willing to kind of be our own inner thief.
So it's like we need to figure out how to pick the locks.
Yeah.
Become experts in the mechanisms of our own minds.
Exactly. And the source even suggests that, the people who are best at helping us unlock those doors are often those who've done their own inner work, they've faced their own fears and kind of dismantled some of their own defenses.
Okay, so self-awareness is key here. I got that. But then the writing also brings up this whole concept of duality, right? Like that constant battle between these opposing forces inside us. I'm not sure how that connects to loneliness, to be honest. It seems like kind of a jump.
Well, it might seem like that at first, but think about how much energy we spend, wrestling with those inner conflicts. Like, should I do this or that? Am I good enough? What will people think? All that internal back and forth can be exhausting.
Oh, yeah.
And it can make it, really hard to connect authentically with ourselves and with other people.
So it's like by getting caught up in those battles, we're creating more distance.
Yeah.
Right? Like between our true selves and the world around us, we're almost too busy fighting to actually engage.
Exactly, precisely. And what's interesting is that the writing suggests that sometimes, like in moments of intense emotion, like deep grief or overwhelming joy, we can get these glimpses of a state beyond duality.
Really?
Yeah. It's like our minds become still and we experience this pure awareness, without that constant chatter of this versus that.
Wow. I can see that.
Yeah.
Like, when something really big happens, good or bad, all the little worries kind of melt away. You're just totally in the moment.
Yeah. That's a great example.
Is that kind of what the author's talking about?
That's it. And, those moments usually happen spontaneously, but the source suggests that things like meditation and yoga can help us actually cultivate that state of pure consciousness, intentionally. So,
like, we can train our minds to quiet down, to get past that inner struggle.
Right.
But okay, so if overcoming duality is part of the solution, what about all the external stuff?
Yeah.
The source talks about loneliness in this hyper-connected world, which seems kind of, paradoxical.
Yeah.
We're more connected than ever, but people feel lonelier. How does that work?
It's one of the big, contradictions of our time, isn't it? I mean, think about it. We're constantly bombarded with these images of like perfect lives on social media.
Oh, yeah.
It's easy to feel inadequate, like you're not measuring up. And that can be really isolating. It's like we're always looking for validation from outside ourselves.
So we're focusing on outward connections, but neglecting that inner work, the vulnerability and self-acceptance that are key to really connecting.
Exactly. It's like we're building up these online personas, but, our true selves get left behind, locked away behind those metaphorical doors.
It's almost like we're living double lives, and neither one feels quite real. So how do we bridge that gap? How do we reconcile this need to connect with the fear of actually being seen, for who we really are?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And I think that's where this whole idea of the grand heist comes back in. Like, we have to be willing to break into our own minds, so to speak, to face those fears, unlock those doors. But it's not about forcing them open. It's about approaching them with curiosity and compassion, like a skilled thief who studies the mechanisms, understands the locks, before gently picking them open. It's a delicate process, you know. And it reminds me of something the Source said about like how our true selves aren't always amicable or even nice. Like sometimes our true nature isn't, all sunshine and rainbows. But that expressing it honestly, it's still better than hiding.
That's a tough pill to swallow, right?
Yeah.
Like we're so conditioned to put on this happy face, this like perfect version of ourselves.
Right.
But are you saying that like by suppressing those messier parts of ourselves, we might actually end up feeling even more lonely?
Yeah, exactly. It's like we're building another layer of walls, right? Not just between us and other people, but between us and our own, authenticity, almost like we're afraid of our own shadows.
It's funny because that makes me think about how differently I act around like close friends versus, say, coworkers or people I don't know as well. With friends, I feel much safer being myself. Even if I'm expressing frustrations or insecurities.
Right.
But with others, I'm way more guarded.
That's such a great example. It shows how like our environment and the people we're with can really influence how much we're willing to open those doors.
Yeah.
And, it's natural to be more guarded with some people than others.
Totally.
But this Source is saying that like letting ourselves be seen, even with our flaws, that's actually crucial for dealing with loneliness.
So it's about finding those safe spaces, right?
Yeah.
Those relationships where you feel like you can truly be vulnerable without, being judged.
Exactly. And when we allow ourselves to be really seen, like fully seen, that's when we open up the possibility for those deeper, more genuine connections.
And that makes me think about those inner thieves we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
The people who really know us. It's like they've earned that trust by showing us their own vulnerability, right?
Right.
They've let us peek behind their own doors, which gives us the courage to do the same.
Absolutely. That's where real intimacy comes from, like this mutual exchange of vulnerability and acceptance. It's not about pretending to be perfect. It's about sharing our true selves, imperfections and all.
It's a beautiful idea, but I have to admit it's a little scary too. Like what if we open up and people don't like what they see?
Oh, yeah. No, that's a totally valid fear. And the Source acknowledges that. Like, it's not always easy or comfortable to be that vulnerable.
Right.
But it also says that those who really care about us, they will accept us, flaws and all. And honestly, that acceptance can be, like, incredibly freeing.
It's like we're finally giving ourselves permission to be human, to be messy and complex. And maybe in doing that, we're also giving other people permission to do the same.
Exactly. And that shared vulnerability, that's what can create the foundation for a truly authentic connection. It's like we're saying, hey, I see you and I accept you, even with your shadows.
Right.
And, you're allowed to see and accept mine too. That kind of mutual recognition, that can be so powerful.
So it's not just about unlocking our own doors. It's about creating a whole culture where vulnerability is like valued and even celebrated. It's about building a world where we can all feel safe enough to be ourselves.
Beautifully said. And this idea of creating a more accepting and supportive environment, it actually brings us back to something we touched on earlier, that concept of duality.
Oh, yeah.
Remember how we were talking about how that constant inner struggle can actually fuel loneliness?
Yeah, it's like we're so busy battling ourselves that we don't have the energy to connect with anyone else.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm still not quite clear on how overcoming duality is supposed to help with that. It seems kind of abstract.
It is abstract, but it really does have an impact on how we experience loneliness.
Yeah.
Think about it this way. Duality creates separation. Okay, it's all about constantly dividing ourselves and the world into this or that, good or bad, right or wrong. And that separation, that fragmentation, that's the breeding ground for loneliness.
So it's like by holding on to these rigid categories, we're actually creating artificial barriers between ourselves and the world.
Exactly. But what the Source suggests is that by transcending duality, by moving beyond those binary distinctions, we can experience this sense of wholeness, of unity. And that dissolves those barriers and opens us up to a much deeper sense of connection.
So it's about recognizing that things aren't always black and white.
Yeah.
That there's nuance and complexity in everything, including ourselves.
Yeah.
And that by embracing that complexity, we're moving closer to wholeness.
Precisely. And the Source really emphasizes that this isn't just about like an intellectual understanding. It's about a direct experiential realization of this unity, this interconnectedness. It's about feeling it, not just thinking about it.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do we get there? How do we actually experience this transcendence of duality? It seems like a pretty lofty goal.
Well, the source points to things like meditation and yoga as pathways to this kind of experiential realization. It's about using these practices not just as like techniques, but as gateways to a deeper state of consciousness, a state where those rigid boundaries kind of dissolve and we
Yeah.
can experience a sense of interconnectedness with everything.
It's like those practices can help us quiet all that mental chatter, that back and forth, and create space for a more profound experience of unity.
Exactly. And maybe, in that state of unity, in that pure consciousness, maybe loneliness just it ceases to exist
Yeah.
because we're no longer feeling separate or isolated. We've recognized our fundamental interconnectedness with all things. It's like the walls of the house dissolve completely and we're left with this boundless space, boundless connection.
Wow. That's a really powerful image. It almost sounds like a spiritual experience.
It can be. And the source does seem to suggest that this whole journey of overcoming loneliness, it is ultimately a journey of self-discovery and spiritual awakening. It's about recognizing our true nature as beings of love and connection and realizing that those qualities, they're not something we have to like earn or acquire. They're already within us.
It's like we're uncovering something that's always been there, but that we've covered up with all our, fears and insecurities. And by peeling back those layers, we're revealing our true selves, our true potential for connection.
Beautifully said. And that act of uncovering, of revealing, that's what this whole grand heist is all about. It's about being willing to delve into ourselves, to confront our shadows and embrace all our complexities, all in the pursuit of a deeper, more authentic connection, both with ourselves and with the world around us.
It's like we're reclaiming those parts of ourselves that we've, kind of pushed away or rejected. And in doing that, we're creating a more whole sense of self.
Yeah, exactly. And that sense of wholeness, that integration, it's what allows us to connect with others in a more authentic way. Because when we're comfortable with our own complexities, we're less likely to judge other people for theirs.
Right. Yeah. It's like we're creating this ripple effect of acceptance and understanding. It starts with us,
Yeah.
and then it extends outward
Mm-hmm.
to our relationships and to the world.
Precisely. And that brings us to another important point that the source raises, which is the role of communication in combating loneliness. Carl Jung actually said that loneliness doesn't come from not having people around, but from being unable to communicate the things that really matter to us.
Wow, that's really powerful. You can be surrounded by people, but if you feel like you can't express yourself, if you feel like you're not being heard, that can be incredibly isolating.
It really can. It's like those locked doors within us, they're also blocking the channels of communication. Like we might be physically present, but we're not really engaging. We're not letting ourselves be seen or heard.
So true connection isn't just about being in the same room as someone. It's about creating that space where we can share our thoughts and feelings, even our vulnerabilities, without being judged or rejected.
Exactly. It's about fostering this culture of empathy and understanding, where we really listen to each other, with open hearts and minds.
This whole conversation has been such a good reminder that getting over loneliness isn't just about finding more people to hang out with. It's about, it's about doing that inner work, confronting the fears and insecurities that keep us locked in our own little world.
It is. It's about recognizing that we all have those locked doors, those fears and vulnerabilities, and that it's okay to ask for help in unlocking them.
And it's about extending that same compassion and understanding to others, right? To create a world where being vulnerable isn't seen as a weakness, but as a strength, the strength to show up as our true selves, imperfections and all.
Beautifully said. And I think that's the real message of this whole deep dive. Loneliness is a universal human experience, but it doesn't have to define us. By embracing our own complexities and fostering this culture of empathy and understanding, we can unlock those doors and create a world where connection, not isolation, is the norm.
So to our listeners out there, we leave you with this. What doors might you be ready to unlock? What steps can you take today to cultivate more authenticity, more vulnerability, more genuine connection in your own life?
We encourage you to think about that and to remember that you're not alone on this journey. We're all in this together. And by supporting each other, by creating space for vulnerability and authenticity, we can create a world where everyone feels seen, heard, and connected.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into loneliness. We hope you found it insightful and empowering. Until next time, keep exploring, keep connecting, and keep unlocking those doors to your true self.